Hey everybody, so the new update Wild Blood has been out on the PTS for a couple days and it has not been receiving too hot of a reception. Basically, everybody I've asked about their opinions on this new update has had mixed feelings at best. And for good reason. So in this video, I'm going to look at some of the complaints and my opinions on this Wild Blood update and why it's probably not going to be a very good one for Albion. Okay, so just starting real quick with what new is coming in the update. There's sort of 5 categories of things that I'm going to label here. We have new potions, we have the new weapon line and the shapeshifter weapons, we have awakened items, we have the tracking, and we have the new island changes. Most of the criticism and my biggest concerns come around awakened items and tracking, and then a little bit of islands as well. However, I don't know really anything about islands. I'm really not engaged in that gameplay at all, so I'm just not going to touch on islands in this video. I'm sure there are other people you can ask about that with much better opinions. For tracking and awakened items though, I think they have some pretty big fundamental issues, so let's explore those. So starting off with tracking, this is the one that I was least impressed by. If I had one word to describe my experience testing out tracking, it's annoying. It's just annoying. The entire gameplay loop and process of going out and tracking is just not enjoyable at all. It's not even that it's like boring or something like gathering sometimes is, it's just strictly annoying. You go out, you find a track, and then that track is going to lead you to somewhere else in the zone. So you go there and, okay, you find another track, and it leads you to somewhere else in the zone, and you find another track, and then another track, and then another track, and then eventually you're like, yes, finally I found the mob that I'm trying to kill for the reward, and you start hitting it, and 2 seconds later it just dicks off, and you have to restart the process all over again. And thanks to some data mining, we can see that the minimum steps to get the mob to finally let you kill it is 2, but the maximum is literally 100. That would take so long. You have to cross the zone like every single step. This is just absurdly annoying process of actually tracking down and hunting this mob. It is not interesting, it's not fun, it's just purely aggravating. But for me, that's not even like the main issue. Let's say that by some miracle, they reinvigorate tracking over the next month and make it a fun, enjoyable activity. It's still not going to be enjoyed by people because it's in the wrong environment. Throughout the past few years, SBI's development has taken a very specific path that segregates the player base based on group size. So they've taken all that solo content, for example, and put it in one area. If you want to do solo, you do corrupted dungeons, you do mists. They've taken all the mid-scale content and put it in like the roads or the crystal arenas or whatever. So if you want to do like 2 to 7 people or 3 to 7, you go into the roads. If you want to do more than that, like the Zergy content, the mid-scale Zergs 20v20, the full ZVZs 100v100, that's the black zone. Everybody has their own little zones for them to play in. And yes, while you can play outside of these areas, you can go, say, solo in the black zone if you want to, there's been a very clear push away from supporting that type of gameplay and making it at all sort of easy or fun or rewarding. And this was done for a very specific reason too. In Albion, group size is really important. It's a really important part of a group's strength. And so the way it was before, say like when the solo players really only had the black and red zones to play in, they would constantly get Zerg ganks by 7 to 30 people, and it was made for a really unfun experience for most of the player base. So they changed it and added like corrupted dungeons and mists and basically areas that allowed them to not have to endure that. Same thing for small groups and all that sort of stuff. Basically, there was a reason specifically that Albion was designed in this way. Why did I go on that little monologue rant? Why is it important? Well, because tracking, it just, for some reason, they're going back on it despite not changing anything and expecting it to somehow be different. Tracking is specifically for solo to small scale groups. It's for 1 to, I think, 8 people at a time, depending on what you're tracking. But for whatever reason, it's only available to do in the red and black zones, the Zerg areas. So you know that massive problem that we used to have, that everybody used to constantly complain about getting Zerged down in the black zone? Well, what are they supposed to do now? If they want to track, you're going to get Zerg ganks by 30 people. It's just going to happen. That's what the Black Zone is. Why are we adding the small scale content into the Zerg area, an area that's been specifically made and designed and balanced around Zergs for the past few years? Even if the process of tracking was enjoyable, I can't see the experience being too enjoyable because you have to go into the Black Zone and you're 20 steps through tracking your target and then suddenly 30 people appear with gank gear and kill you, and there's literally nothing you can do because they have 30 people. So really, I just don't understand. There seems to be no real strong mechanics preventing Zergs from just controlling all of the Black Zone tracking like they control all of the other Black Zone objectives and reward. Sure, they can't literally track with 30 people at once, but they can just split themselves into smaller groups and still be in comms together and help out if any small group of theirs that got split off fights an actual real small group. Tracking right now, as I see it, has the two main issues. One, it's just simply not enjoyable, and two, even if it was, it's in the completely wrong environment that's just going to make it unfun, basically no matter what. Moving on to awakened items, this has almost seen more of an uproar than tracking has, and in my opinion there's three main issues with it. They're boring, they're inaccessible, and they kind of break balance. Starting with the first of those, that it's boring, what I mean is that the awakened weapons system is one of the most basic, uninspired updates I've ever seen. You pay money to awaken your weapon, then it's like, alright, you have to go fame farm to get the attunement stuff, so you go and do the exact same boring PvE that you've been doing for the last 2 years, and you come back and it's like, alright, give me some more silver, and guess what, I'm gonna add a random little bit of a stat that's already on your item, I'm just gonna make it a little bit higher. And then you repeat that process 50 to 100 times. It's kind of like there's nothing new here. You have the exact same stats on the exact same items doing the exact same activities that you were doing before. When these were teased and introduced originally, I think myself and a lot of people were expecting a lot more. Like you'd have to go out and do unique quests to get unique buffs on your weapons and stuff like that, but this is just frankly uninspired. Sure, if you actually had unique new stuff on the items, like, I don't know, your auto tech split to multiple enemies every once in a while or something like that, I don't know, I'm just spitballing. That would be harder to balance and it would take more work to implement, but right now, I mean, this is just uninspired and boring. The second problem with awakened items is that they are pretty inaccessible. These awakened weapons are very expensive to the point where I think most players won't even ever awaken one. First, you have the cost of the 0.4 weapons, which are already pretty overpriced. Then you have the cost of actually awakening it and leveling it up enough to be like worth it. And then speaking of, is it worth it, do you go for a low tier one like tier 4 or 5, or do you go for a high tier one? Low tiers are more affordable and accessible because you can level them up in safe zones and the costs are much less than the higher tier ones, but they're basically useless to have because they're still really expensive to level up, and because the buffs aren't anything new, they're just health and item power and stuff that the item already had, it's simply cheaper and more cost effective to just buy a normal 8.3 or 8.4 of that exact same weapon. So the ones that would be accessible to more of the player base, the cheapest ones, honestly aren't even really worth doing unless they somehow change something about them to make them more effective of just their higher IP counterparts, or make it cheaper to actually level them up so that a 4.4 attuned weapon won't be like way more expensive than an 8.4 of the exact same weapon. So really, no matter how you slice it, I mean, it's just really expensive to awaken an item and actually level it up. And even if you are somebody that has the money to do it, the player base shrinks again that can use them because any of the 6s, 7s, and 8s, the ones that you'd really want to awaken and level up, you have to level them in the lethal zones, which frankly, most people probably aren't gonna be willing to do. Really, no matter how you slice it, these weapons are very, very hard to access, and so most of the player base won't ever really engage with them. The third big problem with awakened items, and one that people are probably most concerned about, is that they kind of break the balance of the game. Power creep has been bad for Albion. Elite spec getting added to the game, the introduction of 0.4 in the first place has all added a greater range of IP that a player can have, and we have seen the direct negative effects of that with the things like the mists. Believe it or not, but PvP games work best when there's a balanced playing field between the players, and the thing that matters is their skill and experience. Albion, as an MMO, obviously can never really have a truly balanced playing field without imposing a lot of rules, but the way that we've gone is just getting worse and worse and worse and farther away from anything even remotely close to a balanced playing field. And awakened items are just that next step forward towards breaking that balance even more. There are two main areas that these could be problematic. One is in IP capped instances like, say, corrupted dungeons. The buffs that you get from the awakened items, their attunements, persist through those IP caps, so you can get an extra 200, 300 IP worth of effectiveness on your weapon just through those attunements. And second, those super rich, super late game players will be able to go into the mist not with 8.4 now, but with 8.4 attuned up the wazoo, giving them an extra, basically, effectively like a 2.5k IP weapon. Will either of these things happen? I don't know, but it doesn't really matter. That's not really the point. The point is that these awakened items update allows it to happen and breaks that even playing field potentially even more. So you take all three of these things together, they're relatively a boring system, they're pretty inaccessible for most players, and they have the potential to break the balance, and we don't really know what's going to happen. It really depends on how it's exactly balanced when it actually gets into the game. But what we do know is it adds the potential for a much bigger pay-to-win aspect in Albion. It likely won't affect too many people, but if you take specific content like the Mists or say 10v and Hellgates, where they're typically dominated by very specific people that are super endgame, sort of bullying people trying to learn them, that problem is just going to get exemplified even more. And of course, with a big potential for pay to win becomes a big potential for a thriving RMT economy, which is just in general always bad for the game. And one thing that's important not to forget with awakened items is this is just the first little step. Awakened weapons are just a little stepping stone for when we get legendary weapons in probably the next big patch after this. They can only get more strong and more inaccessible from here. So overall, with awakened items, we really don't know what's going to happen. We really just have to wait and see the balance of the game once the patch actually comes out. But they are definitely problematic, and they open up big potential for some really problematic things. Okay, this video has already gone longer than I intended it to, but just some quick things I wanted to note on the new potions and new shape-shifting weapons as well. These don't have nearly as big potential for harm to the game, I don't think. These are honestly, all of these, I think SBI did good work with these. They're very cool and interesting. However, these are going to be really hard to balance, especially the shape-shifting weapons. Personally, I feel like SBI already struggles with balance, having to balance between so many different activities and areas and stuff like that, and shape-shifting weapons have some mechanics in them that make them like very hard to balance just innately. Having different stats on the shape-shifting form versus your normal armor, that's a nightmare to try to balance. Having buffed auto attacks, for some reason all the shape-shifting forms just have better auto attacks than literally everything else in the game. And not to mention all the persisting effects persisting through to your shape-shifting form, creating some crazy weird combos and stuff. It's just, honestly, these things are going to be a nightmare to balance, and I highly expect shape-shifting weapons to basically permanently be in a state of unbalance, either too strong or too weak. Anyways though, that's just my thoughts on the patch. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments and stuff. Make sure you do all the other stuff you do YouTube videos as well, and I will see you in the next one.